Welcome to the Life Rocks podcast. In this podcast, we explore how nature, science, education, and culture can benefit all children and future generations. This is a show for educators, parents, mentors, and anyone interested in making the lives of our children, families, and communities better. So sit back, take a breath, and enjoy the show. And now for your host, Asher Cloran.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Life Rocks podcast. I'm Asher and I'm stoked today to welcome Tora Jong. Tora Jong is a passionate and nurturing soul who discovered a love for supporting mothers and their families through her time spent in nature connection. Her mission is as a birth doula and is to support the journey of birth through nourishment, education, and empowerment. As a doula, Tora offers non-judgmental support filled with love and compassion and seeks to nurture and nourish, whether it is your first child or your fourth. Tora, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So Tora and I met out at Ancestral Movement Retreat in Araluen, Simon Takur's retreat, and out there people practice all sorts of weird ancestral skills and movements, and just like living in the bush for a long time. So Tora and I got talking about her passion for childbirth and getting back to some more natural ways of giving birth. And it's something that I've been very interested in for a while due to how humans develop and what's an ideal childhood and what's an ideal birth and how that sets us up for life. So we're going to jump into some of these topics today because I think it's an absolutely vital part of our education as humans to understand this stuff. It's something that's been really kept in the dark from us. It's something that's been portioned off to the realm of doctors and professionals in white lab coats and in rooms in hospitals. So today we're going to demystify a little bit of that and unpack a bit of it. In the intro that I gave to Tora to the show, I asked, what's one of the biggest things that we could do to help future generations and help children of this earth have a better existence? And Tora said, if we can change how society and media perceives birth, it would massively impact the future generations in such a big way, possibly even more than we can imagine. So please jump right into that. I want to know what this huge impact is that we can't imagine.
I guess from where I've stood watching these beautiful mamas give birth and watching the way in which we have really medicalized birth. Not to say that, we don't need that. We definitely need that. And there's a reason why this whole institution is here, why there's this amazing plethora of technology that's right on our footsteps. It's an amazing time to be giving birth. It's just such an exciting period in our generation. But the fact that we have so much fear around that, lots of mums come and they say, what about the pain? What about all these big bright lights and all these sensory environmental stuff that isn't necessarily coming from us, and it's from a place of risk management, really. And when those fear narratives kind of come into a mum that's so vulnerable, that's stepping into this new role, I suppose, from that maiden to mother role, it can be really daunting. And it doesn't have to be that way because we've been doing this for so long. It's how all of us got here. Our mothers, their mothers, the grandmothers, just these huge amounts of women. Every woman that's come before us has done this before. So why are we so afraid of it? And if we could just work around that fear and just really peel it apart to see what we're so scared of, I truly believe that the way we treat women, the way we treat mothers, and in that way how we treat our babies, that will totally impact every path that comes after that. Every little thing, the way, like if it was about babies, we would have, free maternal support. If it was about babies, we would have free diapers, free formula. If it was about babies, there would be so much more support than there is now that doesn't exist. We have to fight for all of these things. That is our birthright, which comes from a place of fear, a place of risk management, because what if something bad happens, and then we go into all of these big forks in the road. And as mums, or as a new mum, as a birthing mum, you do think of these things, or as a birthing parent, anyone in that space, you go into a bit of a protector mode because you want the best for your baby, and you'll do everything you can, and every mum will do everything they can to make it the most gentle process for everyone, for themselves and for their babies. So I think that at the heart of it, if we could just change that fear-based thinking or whatever that we've been fed, I think it'll really impact everything.
Yeah, well said. That's some interesting thoughts there. I think the culture that we do have, like you say, is very concerned about managing risk to the point that sometimes stifles all of these other places in the hope to mitigate one risk. They kind of create all of these other problems that they're not really aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. In the birth world, they call it like the Cascade of Interventions, where if you go into, you start with one thing, for example, an induction of birth. You say, okay, it's time to get induced, and then something else will happen, and go, okay, we've got to do this now, and then something else will happen, and then okay, got to do this now, and we went from a perfectly healthy birth that was well within the due or the guess month, I'd like to say. I don't really think due dates are a thing. It's baby don't have a due date. There's no calendar in there. Sure. They don't know when. They just come when they're ready. And when that period comes, we go, oh no, they're late. You see, like the language that we use is already very
setting it up for failure.
Yeah. So, and then we have this cascade of interventions. It's not helpful for mums because they go, okay, now that you've come this far, you're at a risk of XY percentage of mortality or XY percentage of all these things. And there's just so many things that we say to mums before the baby even comes.
Sure.
That just feeds that, and it's not helpful because it goes into our adrenaline, it goes into our fight flight response. And when you're in labor and you're getting fed this information, your body kind of goes, oh well, it's not safe, and you can't use your instinctive energy and your instinctive physical power to birth, because your neocortex is zooming around being like, oh no, what about this, and what about that, oh what if this, and we can't use our rational brain to birth. That's just not the part of our brain we use. It's such an instinctive thing. It doesn't make any sense, but for some reason we've really incorporated that into the way we have our babies.
So I guess some of like the mainstream story, let's say, around birth is that modern medicine came along and now death in birth is way less likely, and that our primitive ancestors and everyone before modern medicine, the risk of death at childbirth was way higher. How do people contend with that sort of element, and then how's that reflected in, say, the practice of doulaing and midwife, and what are the statistics there, or the numbers, I guess, around how much better it is to have a birth with a midwife and a doula in terms of safety of something complicated happening?
Well, as I said before, like there's definitely, there's a place for these. There's a reason why we have these these procedures. There's a reason why cesareans are a thing. There's a reason why OBGYNs are so good at what they do. They're trained surgeons. They know what they're doing. They're very good at it. But the fact that we go to them as the first point of contact, that might be the point of discussion when we go, oh, why are we doing that? What about the midwives? What about these, where it's a little bit less about, not less about risk management per se, but they're not surgeons.
Yeah.
They understand the physiological ways of birthing. They understand the stages of labor. They understand the statistics much better in that sense. And I can't remember where I saw this from. It must have been a documentary. I think this was a American documentary, but it was saying that majority, if not all, of midwives at the time, this is a bit outdated, but at the time no one had ever seen a physiological birth. Midwives and OBGYNs, and that's alarming. If no one that works in hospitals and birth centers has ever seen a physiological birth, how do we expect to support a mum that wants that for herself?
Right. And so by physiological, you mean no intervention, no drugs, no...
By physiological, I mean like a vaginal birth. So
Wow.
No cesarean,
No cesarean.
No episiotomy, like just a physiological birth. You just go through it all and just birth the baby as you would.
Yeah.
And I guess with the medical side of things, we go, oh no, but if we go back into history, we'll be like, yeah, there's definitely been more deaths just in general, not just in births, just across all of the diseases and all of the things that the human race has ever had to face. But I think we kind of forget a bit of context as well, because there was a point where only up to semi-recently that they're like, oh, actually washing hands might be good. And doctors discovered that they needed to wash their hands.
Sure.
So that would be like a little part of it as well, like a little part of the puzzle, because the birthing world and birthing mamas, they're not isolated. They don't, it's not just, since medicine has come through, we've got less deaths, yes, but generally in the medicine world, I think that is a big thing. The way we understand our bodies and bacteria has come so far. So I think the picture seems to be much bigger than some of the discussions that we might see just in passing.
Yeah, absolutely. And from what you're saying, it seems that, there's this opportunity here for doctors, midwives, doulas to work together in some sort of harmony and have the doulas and the midwives really leading the experience and having the doctors and the surgeons there as a line of defense for that, final worst case scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And we all all of these roles are there for the mother and for the baby.
Yeah.
And I think we forget about the mum sometimes, and then we go, oh, well, as long as the baby's happy and healthy. Right. What about the mum?
What about the mum? Yep.
What about the mum? And I think we forget that sometimes in the conversations in medicalized situations.
So I'm sure now that you've been in this work for a little while, you've seen a lot of births, you've been around a lot of the birthing experience, and then probably even prior to this, you've had some experiences maybe that weren't as connected to the doula midwife world. Can you maybe just describe a bit of what the contrast would be between, say, the hospital medical birthing way and then some of the more wholesome, maybe even home birth experiences that you've been a part of?
So I personally haven't been involved in any home births.
Yeah, sure. It's great even for the audience to know what the hospital contrast is to have a doula in the hospital.
Yeah, so I guess doulas, birth doulas are not medical practitioners by any means. Like we are there to support the mum and family and to provide support to whatever birth that they would like.
Yep.
So it's just a role of empowering mums and even supporting them through evidence-based birthing practices as well, and just really centering that around being informed. Because if you have a general idea of all of the information that is all evidence-based, and like you have the statistics, you have the research, and there's so much research out there at the moment because of the wonders of technology. There's so much wonderful research around that you can go and look for it, and to be able to get to the birth and go, okay, this is the plan that I would like, and if this happens and this might happen, okay, great, and I would like this other thing to happen. And just being able to kind of have a bit of all the forks in the road in the back of mama's mind, just so that when they do come to it, they don't go, oh no, if I had known this, I wouldn't have made that decision. That for me is the most heartbreaking to hear from a mum, to get to a certain point and be like, oh, I wish I knew about this. And then I wouldn't have.
Can you give an example of what that wish would be?
So for example, they go, oh, okay, we need to, you've been in labor for too long. We need to put you on an epidural because you need to get some rest and all of this kind of talk. And they go, okay, so now we're gonna put you on the epidural and XYZ. And then after this, they go, okay, well now the labour has slowed down, so we might have to look at a cesarean option, perhaps.
Okay.
And then they go, okay, so there's all of these things, and then there's the cascade of intervention, as they call it. And then the mum goes, oh, there are all of these other natural, like less invasive pain relief options that I had no idea. I didn't know about the water injections. I didn't know about the spinning babies techniques to help bub move around, acupressure. I didn't know about all these things, and I had to go through surgery basically and come out the other end and go, oh, well, why didn't anyone tell me? And that's just the worst thing. You could be like, oh, well, what if? And we wouldn't have known what would have happened if you had done the other stuff, if you had that option to begin with. So I guess it's, for me, being able to be like, these are all of your options and this is what might happen. So if you take this medication that they give you, then bub might have a little bit of trouble breathing, and here's the research for that. There's a chance, so so bub comes out a little bit blue and go, okay, it's because I had this. All right, it's not just like, oh no, everything and then just the big freak out, bub gets taken away, doesn't even get to go on the boob, and then everyone just goes all over the place. Mum's exhausted and adrenaline's going, and she's like, bub's all the way over there. Now they're taking him to NICU because he can't breathe. And there's all of these situations that not necessarily could be avoided, but if they had been informed, it would have had a very different reaction and a very different way that their body would have reacted to all of that as well, because all that stress ties into everything. The way we breastfeed, for example, bub comes and we want to try and breastfeed. You need that oxytocin, you need all of the good gooey love hormones to help that bond, because it's been such a big labor for everyone. You need all of that chemistry, and that's what nature has done for us. It's provided so much of that in our back pocket already. It's part of our DNA. But to kind of sever that right in the middle and go, oh no, and then just get separated. And we see what it's like for animals when they get separated from their babies, from humans, like all of it. It's not great, and it's not great for people that are watching. So can you imagine what it might be like for a mum and a bub who's going through that themselves after having such a big labour themselves?
It'd be very tense moments, and if the stress is still up, it takes away a bit of that initial joy and miracle and connection that ought to be there in those first few moments. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. So for people who aren't fully sure about what the difference is, say, between a doula and a midwife, can you define those two terms and how they might work together?
So they definitely work together. They work together really, really well. In all the situations that I've been very, very privileged to be in the same room as some really amazing midwives and student midwives that are so passionate and buzzing with love for birthing mums and bubs and families. There's lots of fear sometimes when doulas come into a workplace like that, because some hospitals and midwives might have had not great interactions with some doulas, so they could cause some friction, and same with some doctors as well, where some doulas might have had some I don't know, a bit of conflict or just a clash. But I've been very blessed to be in very wonderful situations where everyone just really, the mum and bub and partner, they're all at the center of this, and everyone has the same goal for them. I guess for the midwives, they are medical practitioners. Well, they know all of their work. They know they work for the hospital or for the birth center, or if they're private midwives, then it's a little bit different. But for in the hospital setting and birth center setting, they work for that institution, and they do an amazing job at it. And they can be that middle person between the mama and the doctors as well. So I had this personal experience when I was birthing my bub, where I had a beautiful midwife, and she would be that person in between me and the doctor in early stages of labor. And I didn't want to talk to the doctor at the point. There's a lot going on for me, and she could be that middle person for me, which I was really grateful to have. And a doula could also be that middle person as well. I guess it's just different for every hospital and birth center. In the birth center, there's a continuity program as well, where midwives run that program. So it's like a midwife run thing compared to a hospital where it's a little bit different. It's just not midwife run necessarily. And there's a continuity of care, which is the thing that often lacks in birth and in pregnancy. Doulas are they're not medical practitioners for the most part, and they are there to advocate for the mum. So they work for the mum compared to working for the hospital.
Gotcha.
So the way, I guess, the things that might tie our hands might be different to what might tie midwives' hands, policy-wise. So I'd say that would be the biggest difference.
And are you working with the parents for a period of time leading up to the birth as well, and then after? And how long would that process normally start?
So it varies, because every mum's different, every birth is different. So it's going to be a bit of a different shape for everyone, but generally seeing and supporting mums and their partners before the birth is very important, especially because I wouldn't have, for the most part, I don't know them prior to that. So important to build a rapport and build a relationship, and to ensure that they are comfortable enough to feel and say and do whatever they need to do when Bubs decides that they want to come.
Sure.
And so that whole prenatal support includes navigating hospital stuff, navigating information around inductions, navigating postpartum, just everything relating to the whole process, and just having a pair of extra hands that understands and has seen this journey before in other shapes. just having that continuity is so important, because in a setting, say, without a doula or without a continuity midwife, a mum goes into labour, she goes into the hospital, and in terms of who gets to support her apart from their partners, the midwives are there. It depends who's on shift. So say, mum's about to go into labour, baby's, an hour from being born, and this midwife that they go, oh, I love this midwife, she's so great and she's been so amazing, I feel really connected to her, and she's finished with her shift.
Not here tonight. Yeah.
Gotta go home now. And then this other midwife comes in and you go, oh, I got to tell my whole story all over again. Or, oh, I'm not really vibing with this midwife. Or, it could be whatever reason it is. And to have that element just taken away, just to have that as the same person, so you don't have to retell your story. You don't have to navigate these big social things when you are in labour and you're just, trying to go with the flow. It can be really difficult to navigate these new faces that come in and out of the room. Having someone there is just, it makes such a difference, and having someone after as well. So having a doula through the whole entirety of the birth, and for me, usually I'll stay there for a little bit until they feel comfortable, and I'll be like, okay, I'll see you in a few days or something like that. And it's just that it's the same face for the whole thing. And postpartum, I meet them in their homes and we get to adore their baby and get to adore the mama and be like, oh my God, this amazing thing. And it's just always so wonderful for me to watch a mum just go through this entire journey. It's absolutely spectacular. And for them as well to have a familiar face throughout that whole thing, to be like, yeah, you saw it, you were at the birth, I don't even need to tell you what happened, because you can probably tell me what happened.
Yeah,
I experienced that personally as well. When I had my bub, I was like, I had no idea what was going on. And then postpartum, when I saw my student midwife, I was like, oh, did this happen? She was like, yeah, do you want me to tell you what happened? I was like, yes, please. And she could tell me. And I was like, oh, that's right. Okay. And that was so beautiful. And I was so, it really helped me empower my decisions that I made at the time, because I went, oh, I don't actually know why I did that. And she's like, yeah, because this happened and that's why you had to do that. I'm like, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. Okay, great. And it just helped so much with the debrief, with the big debrief of birth. And it's such a life-altering thing that it's so helpful to talk about it after the fact. And we don't have a lot of postpartum care for mums at the moment. We give them a lot of antenatal courses, there's classes, there's online classes now, there's, you can go into the birth center and they do programs, and there's all of these meetings that you see the midwives leading up to the birth. And then you have the baby and they see you 1 or 2 times and then they go, okay, good luck. It's like, oh, okay. And then you got to go see a GP or go see whoever it is that you need. But
strangers, other strangers.
Yeah, it's it kind of feels like, for me, after I had my bub, I was like, oh, it feels like I kind of dropped in the deep end a little bit.
Right.
There's no course on how to have a baby, like how to raise a baby. There's no course on how to help them sleep. There's no course on like breastfeeding. There's no course on how to take care of my body, how to take care of myself on a nutrition level. I have to really seek that out on my own. It's not really given to me. So to have anyone that is in the know to support mums from day one all the way till the end, where they're feeling comfortable and they're like, okay, I think I got this. That's the best thing you could ask for, I think.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow. You've really mapped that process out for people, and I think highlighted the importance of having a team for childbirth, for the mother and for the family.
Oh yeah, for the partners too.
For the partners. Absolutely. Too. and for the witnessing, as you say, of making sure that the mother is there with another set of experienced eyes who knows what's going on and knows how to help and knows where to apply a bit of love and guidance. Because of if you're back in the home after childbirth and your partner is the only one with you, and maybe a visit from some relatives, something like that every now and then, it's not really substantial enough to create that nurturing container for the mother who's just been through a massive process.
Yeah, and for the partner too, like I guess in many conversations I've had, lots of mums have gone, oh well, my partner will be there, so
Right.
so it's fine. I don't need any other extra support, which is fine. Like, partners, men, women, they're great. They're so keen, and they're watching their partners give birth, and it's amazing journey for them as well. But that's the thing, they are going through it as well, in a way that they might not be having the baby, but they are in some way having the baby. And there's evidence to show that partners actually have an increase in prolactin as well when their partners have their babies, which is amazing. But it just means that maybe there needs to be someone else that isn't part of that family shape that can stand there and be like, okay, you can be whatever you need to be. I've been in situations where the partners have been there, and the mother-in-law's there, and the siblings there, and like there's people around. But I remember at one point, one of my clients' partners, he went, I need a moment. I need a moment. And he needed to leave the room for whatever reason. He needed to have a moment to himself. And I was like, yeah, go do that. Go get a cup of tea, go take a little one to the playground. Just, we'll be here for a little bit, come back in a second, we'll be fine. And it was, I think he felt great that someone was like, go.
Yeah.
Just go, and you can come back when you're ready, and not have that extra pressure. I'm like, no, you have to be here because no one else is here. And some partners love that, and they're just so keen to do all the things. But sometimes we need a moment, and it's lovely when there's someone else there already and you don't have to think about it, and you're like, okay, there's a little bit of weight.
Can actually take a moment.
Yeah, it takes a village. Like, we're not meant to do this on our own. That's
the story that kept popping in my head. It takes a village to raise a child and to give birth to a child.
Absolutely.
So what drew you into this work? Like, what really cultivated that sense of curiosity and then pulled you in?
To be really honest, I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't tell you when or how. It just kind of made sense at the time that it did.
When did it hit you?
4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I was having some quiet time in the bush, and I was going through a lot of things at the time, and it was just me in the forest with this really old dirt and old trees. And my head was spiraling into heaps of different conversations and narratives about everything that ever existed. And I started going through this rabbit hole of births and how we got here, and it just made sense. And something just went, and then I didn't think about it for ages. And I think it was maybe a couple of weeks later, I was back in Canberra, and just that little moment of like flashback kind of came through, and I was like, and I was like, and this was, I never studied anything to do with births. I had nothing to do with it. And then I was like, maybe I'll look into it, and started doing some Googling, and I spoke to a beautiful friend who happened to be a doula, and I was like, oh, that's right, she does birth stuff. And so I asked her about it, and she was like, oh yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. And she was telling me all these things, and I was like, that just makes so much sense. That just big Tetris moment where the shape just kind of went click, and I was like, ah, of course, like, of course it makes sense. And so I just went, well, look, I have time, I've got a little bit of money, why not? So I just looked up some different birthing classes and doula classes, and there was kind of one that kind of popped up that was coming up, and I was like, oh, perfect. And that was it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Open the door for you.
Pretty much, yeah. And the doors just kept opening, really. There's always so much to discover and learn and explore with birth. It's a constant learning, which I've found to be the most extraordinary.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Life Rocks is not just a podcast. It is an education foundation centered around connecting children to the magic of nature through earth sciences. As a self-funded foundation and startup, we are constantly seeking support so that we can continue our great work. So if you feel called to donate to Life Rocks, please head down to the show notes and find the relevant donation link. We accept regular money as well as cryptocurrencies. We greatly appreciate you, our Life Rocks community. Now, back to the show.
Thanks for sharing a little bit about your journey into doulaing. And it just shows me that process of curiosity, discovery, education, and then deepening into that realm and passion. But I think for most people, this realm of education and learning is either something that they get thrown into because of life, like, you know, people get pregnant and women get pregnant, and then plunged into the learning process of childbirth. You don't really hear too much about it at all. There's nothing taught in school other than a few little things in a textbook maybe. So can you speak a little bit about why you think it's important that we learn about this sort of stuff in school, and at what ages and in what ways?
Yeah, we definitely don't talk about it enough. And the main time you hear about people learning about it is when they're pregnant themselves.
Yeah.
As you say, or their partners are pregnant themselves, and they have to learn about it. Because up to that point, what do we know about births? Well, the media tells us that it's in really brightly lit rooms. You're on your back, probably legs up in stirrups, and you've got a doctor, usually male, kind of just asking you to push.
And it's going to be painful.
And it's going to be painful. There's screaming and there's yelling and there's vulgarities and there's all of these things, which does happen sometimes. But that's the thing, it's sometimes. And for the most part, I don't think, I have personally never supported a birth where mum was in stirrups or on her back, for that matter. It doesn't really make sense gravity wise, like how.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the ways that we have been taught to learn about birth has been really through the lens of Hollywood, which isn't necessarily the most.
No, it's not a
effective.
Reliable source.
No, not at all. No, not a reliable source of information, and it feeds into unnecessary fear-mongering narrative, which we don't need. There's enough going around of fear and mongering and all that stuff and anxiety. We've got our dose of that already. We don't need a slice of that extra piece of pie. So to be able to start that from the very beginning, I think would make just an amazing amount of difference in the way we view
just to
births,
shift that perspective that it doesn't have to be all of those things that Hollywood says it is.
Exactly. For example, I was supporting a mama who was birthing in a birth center, and she had her little one with her, and her first bub she would have been maybe 2 or maybe three or 4 years old, and she was there. She was there. She was in and out because the labor took a little while, but the little girl was in and out. And when Bub was here, we're like, okay. And she was just there waiting and just like giving Mum some soft touches and holding the heat pack on her head. And she was there while her sibling was being born. And for her to be able to watch what women are capable of, what her mother is capable of. There's no screaming, no big lights. The room was dimly lit. Mum was in a pool, a little birth pool. We just had little flashlights just to kind of so we could see what was going on through the water. But apart from that, it was quite calm and gentle experience for her. It was intense for her.
The hospital and the doctors let you set up the pool and stuff in the room?
Well, the pool was already there. So this is in the birth centre. And in the birth centres, well, the one in that particular one in Canberra, they've got a big pool that's already there. There you go. Because there's lots of evidence around water and pain relief and all of that stuff. So that was very much encouraged, and Mum was well into all of that stuff. So she knew when to get into the pool, and it was great. And when the baby came, she suddenly became a big sister and was like, oh, okay, wow, amazing. Yeah, she was absolutely amazed and surprised and lots of emotions happening. And it was such a moment for the family of 3 that then became 4. And that's where it should happen. The fact that so many adults and mums and medical practitioners, nurses, midwives, OBGYNs, the fact that so many of us have not seen a physiological birth or many physiological births, that's a bit concerning. And it doesn't have to be scary and screaming and all of those things. It can be calm, dark, gentle, because that's where we came from, right? The womb is, when you're in it, it's warm, wet, dark, and to come into, to be coming in, birthed into a world where it's dry and bright and people talking and lights
crispy
shining
and white.
Yeah, it's really it's really overwhelming. So to help a baby, encourage that, especially in that particular situation where Mum had a water birth, to be in that slow space transitioning to this crazy world, it's so much more calm, and it doesn't rattle people. It doesn't rattle the mum. Everything's just nice and calm as it should be. Mum picked up Bub straight onto her chest, and she just leaned back and just had a big sigh. And no one touched her for a little while. They just had their little moment. Then we go, okay, maybe let's come out of the bath. And then Mum had to go on to birth the placenta as well. And she did that out of the bath. But that was just so much to me. And that was the first birth I had ever supported. And seeing that in person was such a big alarm bell in my head, going, oh my goodness, we're so misinformed. And this is how it should be. This is how we can be, rather. And the fact that we think that that's absurd, the fact that we ridicule or question people that want to birth at home, and they go, oh, what if something goes wrong? That's always the first question. What if something goes wrong? Yes, then there are all of these things in place if something goes wrong. But what if it goes right? What if it goes right? And we don't ever talk about that, because it's always, what if it goes wrong? What if this happens? Call an ambulance. The question that feeds into the negativity is often so much louder. Yeah,
absolutely. And what if it goes right? Like, tell us what are the long-term benefits, the short-term benefits, the benefits for the family?
So the benefits of physiological birth, I guess, well, avoiding, when I say physiological birth, I'm saying like avoiding cesarean. So we're avoiding like a really major abdominal surgery.
Yep.
So that would be a big one. And you'd be, I guess, statistically a bit more prepared if you ever have another baby after that as well. I mean, you can have a baby physiologically after a cesarean, because cesareans are there for a reason, and sometimes it's an emergency and we do need them. And you can have a VBAC, as they call it. But having a physiological birth definitely sets you up for another physiological birth, from what we can see. And also for the bub as well. So when they come through the birth canal, they get all of this juicy stuff through the birth canal that gives them a really good gut flora.
Yep.
And they need that. They need that coming in, because they're going to start breastfeeding. They're going to start ingesting things through their mouth. And there's a lot going on. And we know all the things to do with your guts and how they affect our nervous system, how it affects our whole bodies and the way we are.
Yeah,
so
massive.
It's a huge thing in itself, the fact that they're coming out of the birth canal. And also, I guess for the mum, postpartum depression, that's often a major thing when there's heaps of interventions. Statistically, there's just less postpartum anxiety and depression when they have physiological births, because they are often more supported. And when that happens, breastfeeding can come a bit more naturally. So there's a lot there in terms of how we birth our babies, and just the sheer fact for mums being like, I did that, my body did that. And it's so empowering for mums to be able to do that. And it's such a big conversation when we go through the cascade of interventions and we get to a certain point and we go, my body failed me. I can't believe I'm doing this. I thought I could have this baby, but I can't. I need, for some reason, all of these external things. And whether that's true or not, it's not helpful. It's not a helpful narrative for the mum.
Yeah.
It's not a helpful narrative for someone stepping into parenthood.
Sure.
And we know that we have the statistics of postnatal depression, and it's rampant. It's higher than it should be, and it doesn't need to be. And that's to do with the way we birth, and also the way we support mums before and after the birth. And we talked about the continuity of care. We don't have that. And we talked about before, like, if it was about babies, all these services would be free and good. They would be free and informed and of adequate quality. And we don't necessarily have that at our fingertips. We have to dig for it, or we have to be privileged enough to be able to financially afford it, which is absurd in itself, because then we're already cutting ourselves at the core of the way we treat humans that haven't even had a chance to like, they're fresh little beings, and we need to be supporting them in this life, and we don't even get any support to support them in the first day. So if we could just change, which is such a systemic thing, and it's such a cultural and societal thing, they're very, very big discussions. But if we could slowly change that with every birth, with everyone, with every conversation we have about birth and about mums, this whole transition to how we see and perceive babies would really affect the way that they grow into adults, into humans, and into amazing go-getters, whatever it is that life has come for them. And they'd be able to do that in a way that they feel supported, because they know what that support feels like, and they've had a taste of that as well. And how can you provide something to someone when you haven't had that yourself?
Yeah, really well put. And I'm starting to see exactly why you wrote what you wrote at the start of the discussion of how this could change everything and change the world, and the impact would be massive if we can change these belief systems. And yeah, it sounds like we really do need to get this work into schools, and the amount of areas that would benefit is insane. It's yeah, really obvious that if we educated more about birth and demystified and showed that there can be an empowering experience for birth, it doesn't have to be this hard narrative we've been sold from Hollywood or the medical system. It can be a beautiful, empowering event that makes women feel more confident and more empowered in running their families and having children, and can make the siblings feel more connected to their newly born little brother or sister, make the dads feel more supported and like they've got a tribe around them that's not all on them.
Yeah.
And all of these have huge impacts for how a child's going to develop into early childhood and then be a teenager and then be an adult. So yeah, I think culturally we need to see this big shift take place, and I'm sure people like yourself and all the other doulas and midwives are working very hard to educate. And I've known some other midwives especially who work very hard in this space, like Jane Collins, her school, to enlighten people to all of these practices.
Yeah, for sure. To be able to empower people to say you can sit in the driver's seat rather than feel like you're being taken for the ride.
Yeah,
is really impactful.
Yeah. And there's so many levels to it as well. So, you're working at a very deep level with deep awareness of and hands-on firsthand, experience as a professional here. But to be able to teach just the beginnings of it, surely we can bring that into primary school. Surely we can teach a level of this to high school, and even I'm sure it would affect things like teenage pregnancy. Like if people understood, the reality and the meaning and the value of birth, it would probably not make people so casual about their bodies, and have a bit more respect around these sort of things too.
Yeah, and respecting for each other as well, so that it's not a taboo thing.
Yeah. Removing the shame and the taboo.
Exactly. Yeah, shame. So much of that can get wrapped up in birth and in the early stages of parenthood, and through parenthood there's a lot of guilt as well, and we can see the foundations of that start in the birthing space often.
And does a birth have to be painful, or are there ways, like you've mentioned, you've been getting into this practice of hypnobirthing? I'm sure there's breath work. Like, what is the potential that a woman has in her body to have a less painful birth or pain-free birth?
There's a lot of conversations about pain around birth, and it is different for everyone. And I've heard stories of mums having not a painful birth, but they said it was intense. They don't use the word painful. It's like, it was intense. And for some mums, they're like, oh, it was so painful. There's a spectrum. And I guess with hypnobirthing, when I'm teaching hypnobirthing to mamas and partners, there's a bit where we talk about language around birth. So, for example, when we use the word contraction, what do you think? What do you feel in your body when you say contraction? You just feel like it's the nature of the word, which is beautiful, but it's not helpful.
Sure.
So in hypnobirthing, we use the word surge, and
much nicer.
Feeling that contrast in your body. How do you feel when I say surge? You feel like gentle, maybe a rolling wave, a wave that brings you in and takes you out. And waves are intense, right? They're huge and overwhelming sometimes. Yeah, but it goes away and then it comes back. And that is like, that's a small little tip of the iceberg of how we perceive birth and labor and pain. And when we change our language and our rewiring our brain through hypnotherapy, in some sense, around that, can be so powerful.
Amazing. Well, I'm super grateful that you've come on today and shared all of this knowledge with our audience. And I'm sure there's some people out there who know, others who don't. I'm always learning stuff in this space from wonderful women like yourself. And I ask everyone at the end of the show the same question, which is, if you had one wish for the future generations of this beautiful planet, what would it be?
If I had one wish.
Only one.
Can I wish for 3 more wishes? No. Gosh. I would just say to give ourselves more credit. The power of self-worth and the narrative that we're not good enough is such a big whirlpool that is not necessary, and that feeds into everything. I'm sure everything from the birthing room to graduation to the grandchildren, whatever it is, and there's just so much pressure that we put on ourselves in every aspect of our lives and through our careers and our relationships, the way we relate to ourselves as well. It's if we could just give ourselves the credit that there's a reason why it is the way it is to some degree. And we've done this before, not us individually necessarily, but in our bloodline, we've done this before so many times, especially in relations to birth. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be anxiety ridden where you're flooding yourself with all the books and all the things. And if we can just go, no, I got this. I think that would make a huge difference to the way we model that for our children. Because if they see that, oh, mama's got this, papa's got this, and they go, oh, maybe I got this too. And I just think that would be such a small way that we could make a difference in their world, and to save them so much money on therapy as well. Just to be like, you got this, it'll be fine. We're informed, we're empowered, we're living in an amazing world where we have all of this new technology and research at our fingertips. It's so much more exciting bits of information to come. We'll be okay. I think kids will be much better off that way.
Massively. That's such a beautiful wish for all the children. And yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. More confidence, more self-assuredness, taking that sovereignty back, and through, the practices that you're doing, that's definitely contributing to all of that space, and stronger families and healthier parents, healthier children. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, I hope we get to do this again in the future. And if people want to find you at your website, it's www.nourishingmothersdoula.com.au.
Perfect.
Awesome. And you can head over there. And you're based in Canberra.
I am for the meantime, I'll be moving down to near Bermagui. So
great.
Down our south coast.
All right. Well,
would like to chat.
Yep, sure. All you future Bermagui mothers out there. Tora will be in the house. So all right, a pleasure as always. Thanks for listening, everyone. Leave us a comment and a like, and we'll see you next time. Life rocks.
Thank you so much for listening to the Life Rocks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then leave us a review. We'll be back soon with more inspiring content, and in the meantime, remember, life rocks.